Yeah, I don't know. I think I'll just stay in tonight, I told my best friend Melissa over the phone. You can't be serious. Haven, you say that every Friday night. She protested as loud music bounced behind her small voice. I'm sorry, I sighed. I just don't want Dad to come home and see that I'm gone. You care way too much about what your dad thinks. Yeah. Do you not remember what happened to my sister when she went against Dad? I reminded her as I sat at the oak desk in my dimly lit room. Fine, but next weekend I will be dragging you out for some fun, she told me before succumbing to the screams of excitement behind her. I blew out a heavy breath of air before looking back at my laptop screen, where my titled work sat empty, the black thick line blinking at me as it waited for more words. I'd been through this kind of English work before, and usually it didn't take me as long as it was tonight, but something about my mood kind of gave in surrender. Completing my homework was easy and I found it a daily simple task most seemed to struggle with, yet here I sat, empty and blank as I leaned my head on my hand. I closed my eyes, listening intently through the silence of my home towards the raging storm outside of my window. Storms in my hometown were I guess somewhat rare, at this kind of magnitude anyway. The rain was heavy, slamming against our tin roof with pure force as its remnants dripped down my window's foggy glass with small landing splashes. Lightning lit my room up, the occurrence seeming to happen every 5 minutes followed by a roll of thunder. I was enjoying the storm, the calming atmosphere and sound it created, but I couldn't help but blame it for distracting me from what needed to be complete 2 nights from now. I shook my head, forcing my eyes to concentrate back to the screen in front of me as I sat entranced by my quiet, serene surroundings and the emptiness of my mind. The questions on my essay paper in front of me blurred together, my brain attempting to create the beginning of an answer when a strong knock sounded from downstairs against the hardwood front doors of my home. My head snapped up. I thought the sound were a delusion until it beckoned for a second time with a more forceful thud. Slowly, I got up from my chair and listened as it continued with more power. I dawdled downstairs and spied through a glass panel beside my front door with searching eyes when the knocking suddenly stopped. My heart now raced with fear, my brain fully involved on the sound as I waited motionless behind the door. This was the type of thing I saw in horror movies where an unsuspecting victim was toyed with through banging of doors and the flicker of lights, which I was now awaiting with frightful anticipation. The pure silence around me stung and only made the waiting more intense, and then, another sound began to penetrate through the door. This time, it was scratching, like wild frantic fingernails digging into the wood. I jumped back slightly, bewildered. I swallowed, then moved forward again. I peered out the window intending to catch a glimpse of the strange sounds, distracting me, scaring me. My eyes trailed along the patio, where rain slammed down, water touching every inch of its wood. It was as my eyes roamed that I saw something unusual, a long white tail, still and long. Slowly and carefully, I unlatched the door and sneaked it open a creak to spy at the culprit. Thunder began to roll and another flash of quick lightning created a jolt of light to the porch as it gleamed with moisture. That's when I saw what had now sparked instant fear throughout my body. I had been expecting a dog, a fluffy white animal that had escaped its yard in fear of the weather, but instead, sitting courteously drenched in fresh rain was a tall breath-halting wolf, the kind you'd expect to see mauling someone in the woods on a reality survival TV show. I froze, and despite the fear coursing through me, the thoughts raging inside my brain, I inched the door open to view its entire being. My eyes raked over the creature twice the size of an average Labrador. My breathing was slow, my mind unsure. Its eyes were large, but not in a sense of aggression. He was shivering cold, soaked. He looked nothing like the killing machine Animal Planet made him out to be, even despite his size. Naturally, I should have closed the door quicker than I could blink, but instead, for some unknown reason, sympathy perhaps, I stood aside, half hidden behind the door. Before I knew what I was doing, what my brain was lacking of thought, I had allowed it entry, another roll of thunder urging it to step forward into my doorway. Rain began to drizzle inwards, dripping on the floorboards as wind pushed forward, creating a howling wisp. "Please don't eat me," I whispered to the still wolf as it stood motionless in my hallway. I took one last glance at the large creature, then back outside where it looked as if a hurricane was brewing before making the odd and dangerous decision to close the door and latch it shut again. I turned back around and glanced towards what I'd actually let into my home. Dad was going to kill me. I looked over its frail and soaked appearance as it stood still and shaking. Its coat was white, yet the moisture gave it more of a yellow tinge. I began to walk around it cautiously, and I almost jumped when it turned its face in my direction. His beady black eyes looked up at me, soft. I tilted my head as I stared straight through its black eyes. My reflection curved like a fisheye lens in its shade. "You aren't so frightening," yet I mumbled as I slowly walked towards the downstairs bathroom where I fetched a dark green towel. I wandered back towards the hall and smiled in surprise when I saw that it was still standing in the same spot, looking up at me as if it were waiting for permission to move. "Can you come?" I waved with a hand as I began to walk backwards towards the main living room where the floor luckily spread into dark masonry tiles. Surprisingly, the beast followed me, every step slow and easy as I backed all the way up to the brick fireplace in the middle of the room, where it flickered and spat with dancing flames. "Here," I spoke, setting the towel out straight on the floor in front of the fire. "You can dry off and then I'll have to shoo you back out before morning when Dad's due back. And before you find the strength to eat me." I smiled, watching with wide amazed eyes as he did as I had said, slowly crouching down until it was flat on its stomach in front of the red and orange flashes of light. My eyebrows creased as I watched the creature lay still, embracing in the warmth and comfort. I backed off, making sure I didn't make any sudden movements before settling down on the dark blue lounge behind me. "You aren't a pet dog, you realize?" I continued talking to the animal, which was glancing in between me and the fire. "Mind if I watch some TV?" I asked as I picked the remote up and clicked the power button on. The wolf turned its head towards me and watched with peculiar eyes while I flicked through channels. I stopped on a documentary about sharks, something I found fascinating. For years I'd had an obsession with them, their grace and power, yet danger interested me. Something that seemed so poised and fluent in the water surprised me when they opened their mouth to reveal the real truth. It was like Marcy Group in my math class. She was absolutely stunning, like a sports model, but when she opened her mouth, there was no class, no innocence, and her insides rocked a shaved head, piercings, and heavy metal music. I guessed it was just like the creature, lying on my living room floor, its eyes closed as it soaked in the newly found heat and comfort as the storm raged onwards outside. I glanced towards him and watched his slow deep breathing, something so serene and quiet, and something that could turn at any moment with razor-sharp teeth, and tear every limb from my body. It was frightening, and a sudden shiver flew through my skin, giving me goosebumps. The wolf opened his beads and glanced directly towards me as if to show it were listening to my thoughts. Maybe I should have gone out tonight. Staying inside, alone, was clearly sending me crazy. I had let a large wolf into my home and was now feeling hints of telepathy from it as it stole warmth from my fireplace. I turned my gaze back towards the TV and let myself sink in. I felt as though I wasn't in any danger despite what I'd allowed into my home. Something inside me told me I'd be okay. Something about the way the animal was looking at me, glancing at me in between every closed-eyed second. I was definitely going crazy, and it was going to put me in a coffin. I watched the sharks bounce out from the water on the flat screen above the fireplace, feeling my eyes grow groggy and heavy. I couldn't allow myself to fall asleep while the wolf was sitting in front of me. I surely wouldn't wake up once it noticed I was now at my weakest, but that didn't stop my eyes from betraying me as hard as I was fighting it. His voice was deep and grisly as he and I stood in the darkness amongst the woodlands of pine trees. "I've been looking for you for a long time. Who are you?" I asked him as I tried to catch a glimpse of light from his shadowed features. "But I'm dangerous for you," he continued, taking a step back as I took one towards him. He seemed to be talking to himself, telling himself that he could not be seen, that I could not know who he was. His 6-foot figure lingered backwards, avoiding me. "Why were you looking for me?" I questioned, my eyebrows creasing as I took another small step in advance. I needed to see if it were true. He shook his head, retreated again. If what was true? I pushed as I titled my head in an attempt to see his features. The rumors, the myths. I don't understand. I shook my head, taking more fluent, persistent strides towards him as he stumbled backwards. I was confused. I needed to know what he was talking about, and an invisible string was pulling me towards him with such a force that it buried into my stomach. I can't let you know, he whispered before I shot up, my eyes bringing me face to face with my living room, the fireplace in front of me spitting as it fought to keep alive. My forehead was sweaty. I ran the back of my hand over the growing moisture when I glanced around the room to confirm I had been asleep, dreaming. I suddenly remembered the night before and my eyes darted back to where the wolf had been sleeping, but the towel was empty, and it was gone. I looked up at the clock and sheer panic raced through me. Dad would be home any minute. I jumped from the lounge and darted around the entire house searching for the large predator, but eventually, I came back to the living with the realization that he was long gone. My breathing raced and I stared at the locked front door. How had he have gotten out? Had I dreamed that too? What is wrong with me? I mumbled, rubbing my head as I sat back on the lounge, confused about the dream, confused about the occurrences of last night. I literally shook my head and headed upstairs to take a warm shower where I would overthink the situation a little more. I'd been having these dreams for about 3 weeks now, and last night was the first time I'd gotten a conversation, let alone a word from the man that continued to reappear. The first time I'd seen him, he was sitting on a rickety old bridge in the middle of the woods, his face staring out into the shallow water below him as frogs and tadpoles inhabited the dirty water. Every time I tried to near him with a step, a howling would pierce the environment and my head would be distracted enough for the man to magically disappear. After that, it was just a foggy haze of me following the man through the woods, his back slumped, his strides long and urgent. I could never keep up and eventually I'd lose him through the dense trees and rain. I had no idea what it meant and I'd never really put much thought into it until now. Dreams were usually things you were thinking about in the lead to sleep, things you put a lot of thought into and subconsciously continued to think about when you slept. I had brushed mine off as simply me watching too much Vampire Diaries, but now I was beginning to think otherwise. "Hey, sweetheart." A familiar voice snapped from behind me, causing me to jump 3 feet in the air. I sighed once I realized who had walked in. "Hey Dad, you okay?" He paused, laying his suitcase on the bench as he crossed his eyebrows at me. "Yeah, you just caught me off guard," I smiled, trying to convince him. "Uh-huh." He mumbled, not convinced at all. "How was Shelton?" I asked, changing the subject as I rolled my flannel sleeves up to my elbows. "Good, the executive wasn't as bad as everyone at the office said he would be." He smiled, enjoying the work talk more than he did any other kind of talk. "So I'm assuming you made the deal?" I smiled, eager for his success story. Many people, well, teenagers like me, would be completely uninterested, in fact, annoyed by this kind of talk with their father, but I didn't mind. I kind of liked knowing he was doing well. If it made him happy, then that was okay with me. "How are your studies going?" he asked, as usual, the tables being turned on me. It was protocol, and the one thing that made me uneasy. I was good at my studies, always graded A's in school, passed every test with flying colors, but it wasn't something I enjoyed. It was just habit, routine. The only person that knew of my real passion was Melissa, my best friend of 5 years. "Good," I shrugged. "Did Melissa ask you out with her again last night?" He continued on the hunt. He never liked Melissa, and he never would. She wasn't like me, matter of fact, she was my opposite. "Yeah," I shrugged again. "She will never get into college with her ways." He sighed, almost sympathetic. I wanted to tell him I was jealous. Her parents weren't pushy perfectionists, and Melissa had no intentions of going to college. "When do you leave for Parkway?" I asked, avoiding another unwanted subject. "Tomorrow night. You'll be by yourself for the week. I'll leave you some money to get you by and I'll be back sharp on Saturday morning." He sighed as he pulled at his tie to loosen the tension. "Okay," I nodded, used to this kind of routine, as he brushed a hand through his thinning brown curls. I was grateful of inheriting them, the long locks twisting at the bottom. I'd inherited a lot from my dad, his hair, his wide blue eyes, but I'd inherited my mother's stubborn spirit, much to his dismay. "You're perfect sunshine, just like your mother was." He smiled proudly as he lightly flicked my nose. Memories came dashing back to when my mother was alive, the way Dad would flick her on the nose and the way she'd crack a small giggle every time no matter what he'd done wrong. I missed it, I missed her, and every memory was painstaking to recant. "What did you end up doing the whole weekend without me?" Melissa asked as we took out seats in English class Monday morning. I shrugged. "Homework, hung out with Dad."
Wow, that sounds fun. She scoffed as she tossed back her deep brown hair, the long strands thin and sending an array of strawberry scent around me. "Wasn't too bad," I lied. "It was boring, but I couldn't let her know that." "Please tell me you're coming to the dress-up party at Tom's tomorrow night, though," she whispered as Mr. Tates began the class. "I don't have an outfit," I shrugged, knowing deep down there was no way out of it. "That's okay. I have tons of outfits we can play with before we go," she beamed with a wide, perfect smile, her round cat-like brown eyes large and excited. "Okay," I surrendered, turning my attention back to the class. I watched as Mr. Tates walked around, describing things he'd written on the board, things that I'd already finished in my reports, things that other students were struggling to keep up notes with. I lightly smiled as I watched from the corner of my blue eyes as Melissa struggled to keep up. "You want me to start your report for you tonight?" I leaned towards her before she turned to face me with a smile. "Thanks, Haven," she winked, easing up on the note-taking. I took pride in being able to help her. Even if it was just the introduction, I knew it helped her. And in the end, the rest of the report she wrote wasn't so bad. Melissa was now staring at me. Her head leaned on her hand as she narrowed her eyes on my face. "Are you still having those dreams?" She suddenly spoke, creasing her eyebrows at me with curiosity. "Yeah," I admitted slowly, unsure of her curiosity in the subject. "Your eyes," she pointed, moving her finger to the bottom of my eyes where I'm certain she had noticed the dark circles. I had tried to cover them up the best I could, but apparently they were still noticeable at close proximities. "Take this as payback for my report," she began, as she rummaged through her bag before pulling out a thick brown leather book. "I found it when my grandfather was moving into his retirement village. He said I could have it, and I automatically thought of you." She held it out for me. "Dream Interpretation." I read over the block title. I gave her an uneven glance. "Thanks. Don't give me that look. You dream way too many strange things. So I thought that might somehow help you." She smiled with rolling eyes. "They only make assumptions. They don't actually do much else," I mumbled more to myself. "Let's see what it says then." "Give it a go," she urged, as I opened the book, watching carefully as the teacher continued oblivious to our disinterest. "I don't know where to start," I mumbled as I flicked through the pages and their subtitles. "Well, what do you dream about?" "Weird things," I shortened, too embarrassed to be honest. "Weird things like what, Haven?" "I'm trying to help you here," she growled, as she snatched the book from my hands to flick through. "I'm in a forest," I began. "What else?" she urged, scrutinizing the book carefully. "It's a pine forest, I think, and there's—" I stopped and thought about just how crazy it sounded. This book wasn't going to help. It was only going to make me look more crazy. "There's what?" Melissa continued, waiting for my response with narrow eyes. I sighed before giving in. "A man." "A man?" she repeated, unsure. "What does he look like?" She then raised her eyebrows. "I don't know in great detail," I shrugged, uncomfortable about her new interest. "Is he young or old?" She rolled her eyes. "Young," I shrugged again. "Tall?" "Yeah." "Cute?" She persisted with a growing smirk. "I don't know," I averted my gaze. "What does he do?" "Stands there, talks, and walks away," I quickly explained. "He talks? What does he say?" She beamed excitedly. "Things I don't understand. Apparently I'm in danger," I laughed, no humor involved on the inside. "That is weird." She screwed her face up, hearing not what she had wanted. "But let's see what we can find." She smiled, returning her eyes to the book. Throughout the rest of the lesson, Melissa ran through every theory possible, linked from pine trees to incoherent men. Nothing really came of it. I was either telling my future within the barriers of finding love and the same distance happening with us as what usually happened with any male in my life, to there being some link with myself and the dead being thrown into it. None of it seemed plausible, and it only made me more in tune with my inner crazy. "Hey, Haven," I recognized the voice instantly as it came up behind me in the lunchroom while I sat with Melissa, Delaraine, Ruby, and Chicago. "Hey, Kai," I greeted back as the familiar face squeezed himself in between Melissa and I. "Oh, hi, Kai." Nice to see you too, Melissa snarled as he turned to shoot her a smile in response before turning his face towards me. How are you? He asked as his brown eyes skimmed over my face, moving from my eyes to my lips, then back up before I spoke. Good, and you? I replied with a small smile as he ran a hand through his thick brown locks nearly cast over his eyes. Better now, he grinned. Kai was a sweet boy, and completely handsome. All the girls loved him, especially the popular ones. Kai was tall, smart, built, an all-star football player. He had a bright future ahead of him, a perfect life, and ever since he set eyes on me, he wanted me to be a part of that future. What's all that commotion about? Chicago, another good friend of mine asked, as he averted his head in the direction of a swooning group of girls. That'll be because of Jake, Kai sighed with a roll of his eyes, his cologne swiftly brushing around the air as I sucked in the attractive scent. Jake Red? Ruby screwed her face up in confusion and shock. No, not that Jake. There's a new one. Just moved here from Parkway, apparently, Kai explained, as we all watched with curious eyes. It was rare we had new kids at this school, especially in the middle of July. Is his daddy a billionaire or something? I asked, watching girls follow the tall boy like puppy dogs, hiding any type of glance towards him from me. Please tell me his dad owns Versace or something, Deloraine begged with her hands together. Neither, Kai continued as we watched him cross the lunchroom. He's devilish handsome with a bad rap sheet. Girls love a guy with a bad name. Simple. He shrugged as the girls began to disperse around the room, back to their tables. Oh my God, Rachel gaped as she sat down at our table, a friend I'd known since before Kai. What? Melissa asked eagerly. He's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, she exaggerated. You thought Marcus Elro was beautiful too until you discovered he wore suspenders and high pants outside of school. Chicago shot towards her as he laughed, and the rest of my friends joined in, much to her dismay. Don't be jealous, Chicago, she shot back with narrow eyes. Chicago rolled his eyes and sat back in his seat with folded arms, the classic 2-year-old tantrum coming out in him. I couldn't help but giggle, Kai using my happy mood to swoop an arm over my shoulder. Seriously, Haven, when are you and Kai going to make it official? Deloraine asked me as the rest of the group stared at us, making me more uncomfortable. The thing was, I didn't mind Kai's arm being around my shoulders, but the idea of him being something more than my friend definitely made me uncomfortable. Let it go, guys, I mumbled towards them, brushing them off as I usually did. Like always, they grew bored of my denial and went back to their small chit-chat, sensing my interrollable tension. You'll succumb when you're ready. Kai smiled towards me as he pulled me close and planted a single quick kiss to my hair before pulling away. I wanted to shudder. I wanted to pretend that it had been awkward, but it hadn't. It was gentle, innocent. The chatter continued, and so did the flirting from Kai's direction. Soon enough, the bell sounded, and it was time to head to last class. I was excited for my final class for the day. It was an interesting class, and I always learnt something new from it. It was the one elective I was allowed to choose, psychology. I walked alongside Kai, who told me about his sister Luna, who was now dating a man twice her age, a man that he was ready to knock out, something I didn't doubt he was capable of. Kai was polite as he stuck close to my side, apologizing every time our hands would knock together at our sides. Girls would wave towards him as he walked by, their flirt faces on and their intentions clear. Their eyes didn't even glance towards me. That was because I was sure they all knew my stability in staying single. Kai wore his baseball cap backwards, his dark hair poking out from under the rim all the way around. His face was perfectly sculpted, rough and hard like he'd been punched a few too many times during football. He wore simple jeans that hugged his long legs and always a Vans t-shirt that held on tightly to his tan muscles. Thanks for walking me, I smiled as we reached my classroom. That's okay, he smiled in return, watching me carefully, the distance close and causing my heart to race. I quickly tore my eyes away before I did anything stupid, realizing we were the only ones in the corridor before footsteps began to enter. I'll see you this afternoon? I rushed. Sure, he nodded as he leaned forward and placed a kiss on the top of my head again as if we were exclusive. I wondered if I should have said something to him, asked for him to stop the PDA in case people started to get the wrong idea, in case he himself started to get the wrong idea. I rambled inside of my head on how to approach the conversation, the sentence, but my mouth immediately shut down when I heard shockingly familiar voice round the corner and come into view of my incapacitated body. He didn't speak much, but I knew. I knew the moment I had heard him ask another student where room A3 was, he was the cause of my dark circled eyes. My mouth hung open. My heart stopped where it sat in my stomach and my muscles froze. I wanted to pinch myself, squeeze my eyes shut to make sure this wasn't just another silly dream, but I couldn't move. My eyes slowly fell on warm yet warning eyes of the man that had been appearing in my dreams. He was also frozen, his 6-foot figure motionless in the hallway, as Kai looked in between us like he'd fallen into a video game that was set on pause. "You must be Jake," Kai began as he stepped away from me to shake the man's hand, his body rigid and tense, instant on setting grounds. "I am, and you are." The dark voice of the man spoke back, his tone sending shivers through my system. "Mordecai, but everyone calls me Kai." He introduced himself as they stared at each other like brooding chickens about to fight to the death. "And this beautiful girl is, Haven," Jake finished off for him, my mind going into overload. "I've heard a lot about you." He smiled warmly towards me, sending shivers through my body, his eyes making complete contact with my own, intent and strong, unlike any other time we'd been in closeness of each other. I tore my eyes away, forcing myself back into reality. Or what was left of it. "I gotta get to class," I rushed out, barely audible as I glanced towards Kai. I hastily exited the entire situation, feeling my brain close to exploding. I was in a daze, confused when I entered my already full silent class where Mr. Warner's voice stopped mid-sentence, his eyes looking over his glasses at me and my not-so-me tardy appearance. "Everything okay, Ms. Waters?" he asked, almost worried. Yeah, just helping that new kid." He was lost. I smiled, making it half up as I walked towards my seat at the back of the room with everyone watching me curiously. I had no idea what I'd just witnessed, but the man that was in my dreams was now in my school as a student. I hadn't seen him up close before, but I knew instantly he was the one that had warned me away from the pine forest. I remembered every word he had said to me, the danger he was, the fact he was there to prove a myth. He needed to stay away from me. And now, here he was in the flesh. It couldn't be real. It wouldn't. Something was wrong with me, or the world around me, which was now spinning. I tried to calm myself down as Whitney beside me grew uncomfortable with my stiffness and distraction from my usual favorite class. Whitney and I were never close. She was the strange girl of the school. We were on different planets, from the same species, yet opposite breed. I forced my mind to concentrate, to pay attention to class. There had to be a rational explanation for what was going on. There had to be. Instead of finding time to reoperate, the nightmare continued when the door opened, much to Mr. Warner's dismay. Magically, Jake stood in the doorway, a piece of paper in hand as he looked around confused and lost. "May I help you, young man?" Mr. Warner asked, as he shot me a glance. "Is this psychology with Mr. Warner?" he asked, confused as everyone stared and the girls gaped at the mere sight of him. "Yes, take a seat," Mr. Warner shot, agitated as he held a hand out towards the class. Jake slowly walked around in search for a safe seat from prowling eyes. Unfortunately, like a classic cliché, the vacant seat to my left is where he decided would be best. I was ready to detonate. Things were far too strange and out of control for my mind to comprehend. The mere presence of him made my skin crawl and my body freeze. Every time he moved, I felt the need to move. Every time he glanced even remotely my way, I felt a tickle of voltage run through my skin. And I wasn't the only one. Whitney beside me was gripping her pen tightly, her dark fingers nearly cracking the plastic as I watched with upheaval. Her eyes were hard and angry on Mr. Warner, like she was being stabbed under the table with pins and needles. Her body was rigid like mine, and every time Jake moved, her eyes would spring towards him. I wasn't sure what her problem was, but I got the feeling it was similar to mine. Or maybe it was because of her merciless Egyptian background. Her parents were strict when it came to boys, and every time she stepped near one or took an interest in one, she felt the need to run. But this was different. Worse. When it came time to copy down notes from Mr. Warner, I found it near impossible to form even a simple sentence while his fresh cologne hung around my head like a dark cloud. "Are you okay?" His soft, humble voice asked as my head tilted in his direction instinctively. "Yes. Why?" I managed out as small chatter around the classroom coated our conversation. "You seem rigid." He instantly suspected, as though he were proud of the reaction he was producing from me. No, I quickly shot defensively to my disadvantage. I slowly dared to look up at his face, his eyes finding mine the moment my head turned. Easily, the images of my dreams came rushing back, only this time, with a clear, realistic face. He was even more attractive up close, just as the girls had described. His hair was light brown, almost ash blonde as it sat untouched and tousled upon his head. Strangely, that wasn't what made my breathing halt. Nor the carved perfection of his smooth face and jawline, but the deep coal color of his eyes, empty and soulless. It was somewhat frightening, and it made my breathing hitch for a second. "What's the matter?" he continued, his voice pulling my brain from his entrancing features. "Nothing," I faltered, looking down at my notes as I attempted to concentrate away from him. "You aren't a good liar," he shook his head as he looked back down at his books, his emotions seemingly pleased at my lack of secrecy. Carefully through peripheral vision, I noticed the bare muscle along his arms, completely shaped like a Michelangelo statue, the kind people were lucky to touch once it had been complete with its perfection. His plain black tee was working hard against his toned skin as black ink caught my eye, peeking out ever so slightly under his t-shirt's shoulder. I found myself trying hard to identify the small scrawlings despite it being nearly completely hidden, but my effort didn't go unnoticed when a quick hand began to pull at the fabric, hiding the ink from any sight. I'd been caught, and I suddenly looked up like a puppy would after destroying his owner's shoes. His eyebrows were raised as he stared at me with a mix of curiosity and arrogance. "Sorry," I mumbled, feeling my cheeks flush before I turned away to bow my head down, completely avoiding his sight. I raised my hand up against my cheek to hide my face, my hair falling to give me as much of a curtain as possible. For the rest of the lesson, that's the way I remained. I didn't move. I didn't so much as flinch. But Whitney, on the other hand, stayed firm and on edge the entire time as I caught her glaring in Jake's direction numerous times. Once the bell rang, I ran from the class as fast as I could. I didn't want to face him. I didn't want to taste any more of the strange sandwich I'd been placed in between for much longer than I already had. As soon as I was free of the room, I bumped into Kai, who was eagerly waiting for me outside the room, his magnetism and sweet smile soothing me from my now sour mood. "You okay?" he asked as soon as I reached him, my face probably dripping with disorientation. "Yeah, just a bad lesson," I admitted, as we began to walk towards the parking lot. "A bad lesson?" He repeated, the curiosity already tinted in his voice. "Yeah, it was a bit hard to concentrate with everyone eyeballing that new kid," I smiled, attempting to shrug it off as nothing more. "Ah, I see," he believed with a nod, as he slung his arm around my shoulder. "Same happened in my class too. All the girls wouldn't shut up about it. I swear, even Miss Crone was relishing in the hot topic of treacherous Jake." "Treacherous Jake?" I smiled, narrowing my eyes on him and his profound new nickname. "Yeah, it's a big word for me. I know." Kai laughed as we continued forward, his arm still in place as I smirked, feeling my mood pick back up. But it was short-lived, and within minutes I caught sight of Jake standing leaned against what I assumed was his Aston Martin Lexus. For once, the arm of Kai was now comforting, and I hoped it would deter Jake and his feeble attempts to create discussions with me. I watched and waited, Kai oblivious as Jake's eyes suddenly shot up from the two blondes standing in front of him. I kept my eyes averted on something else, but kept my peripheral view on his reaction. Sure enough, it did something, but that something wasn't what I was expecting. I guess what I was expecting was to see him acknowledge it, then go back to flirting without another single glance in my direction. Instead, to my further confusion, he nodded simply towards the girls in adieu and got in his car. Soon he was speeding off from the lot just as we reached Kai's BMW, where Chicago and Melissa were waiting. I shook it off as quickly as I could when Melissa's gaze shot behind me. Her mouth gaped as her eyes widened. I asked as Kai walked around to the driver's side. "Hey, Haven." Another voice called me from behind, one that I hadn't heard before. I stumbled as I turned to see her tan face and angelic features. "Whitney." "Hey, can I have a word?" she asked politely as I slowly nodded and took a few steps away to talk to her out of earshot. "What's up?" I urged curiously as people stared. "I wanted to say sorry for the way I acted in psychology class," she began, my day getting more and more creepy as it progressed. "It's fine, I wasn't. I wasn't really myself either," I shrugged honestly. "I have a feeling why too," she whispered, almost embarrassed. "Yeah? And why's that?" I snickered. "The new kid. He isn't. There's something about him that you can't quite get out of your mind, isn't there?" she urged with narrow eyes, my attitude falling flat. "How did you stack it?" "I'm good at reading people," she shrugged, assuming my question's end. "Oh, see you," she smiled sympathetically before turning and walking off. I stood, deranged for a moment, completely baffled at our short, pointless conversation. Why was Whitney as uncomfortable as I had been when around Jake? Had he appeared in her dreams too? What did she know that I apparently didn't? "So what the hell did Whack Whitney want from you earlier?" Melissa urged dramatically towards me while Kai drove us all home, her and Chicago in the back seat as I sat in the front with Kai. It was hard to find a lie. There was no reason whatsoever that she should or would be talking to me, so I thought of the only lie believable amongst the situation. We were paired together for an assignment, I sighed. Ew, Chicago snickered as Melissa began taunting me. Have fun with that, Kai mumbled as he turned into Chicago's driveway 2 blocks from school. Thanks, I smiled to Kai as he parked in my driveway. Anytime, he smiled in return. So, are you going to Tom's tomorrow night? Yeah. Melissa roped me into it. I rolled my eyes. Of course she did. He shook his head as he leaned out his window. Guess I'll see you tomorrow morning then. He waved before pulling out of the drive and leaving. I watched Kai drive away before letting myself into my home where the silence settled in and the air felt empty and cold. I missed having Mum around. I missed having Dad around, but I didn't have a choice anymore. This was the way it had to be, and sometimes it sucked. I dumped my bag on the kitchen bench and sighed. Things were too quiet. They were always too quiet. I switched the television on, and a flash memory of the night a wolf slept on the floorboards beneath the fireplace ran through my mind. I had only a few pieces of homework to do, so my night would be altogether quiet enough for me to fall asleep on the couch watching cliché movies. Hopefully tomorrow would be a better day, but that all depended on Jake, and now, Whitney. I had psych classes every day, and the mere thought of it made me nervous as hell. I picked my bag back up from the table and tossed around inside for my work when something fell out and landed on the floor with a thud. I leaned down and found the book Melissa had given me, the title sticking out like a man on fire. Like this'll help, I muttered to myself as I sat on the couch with all my work in front of me, the book on my lap as I stared at its cover before flipping it over. Ever wondered what your dreams mean? In this self-explanatory titled book, you may interpret every part of your subconscious mind and what it is trying to portray at the current stage of your life. Alphabetically organized, you may explore the ideas and images of what your sleeping mind is trying to tell you. It was like something I expected Whitney to be reading as I flipped it back over and opened it wide. First, I flicked to forests, which read, "Forests suggest a period of time in your life that is changing. Listen to your intuition. You may be feeling burdened by the daily grind of life." Next, I went over dark figure, which made no sense to me. To dream about a mysterious figure indicates that you are surrounded by intense mental anguish. I slammed the book shut and stared at the television, which was flashing colors of cartoons. It made me feel better, carefree, and like a child again. I wanted that feeling back so bad. I tossed the book aside and pushed my homework. In front of myself, the quicker I got it done, the better. But the longer I spent doing it, putting my effort into it, the more it took my mind off of what was going on around me. I had a feeling that's what I needed right now. Throughout my 2 hours of watching TV and doing a few sentences at a time, I'd fallen asleep on the papers, tossing and turning as the crunching beneath me woke me up. I rubbed my face and smiled a little at the realization I hadn't had any wild dreams. I couldn't handle another one of them at this point in time. I sat up and tried to flatten my workout as I set it in a pile beside me. I pulled my phone out from my bag and checked its screen to see 3 missed calls, 1 from Melissa and 2 from Kai. I set the phone down beside me as well and chose to ignore it. I headed upstairs, took a long, warm shower, and changed into my short cotton shorts and blue tank top. I trundled downstairs and let my long brown curls stray to dry off my strawberry-scented shampoo as I prepared dinner. Thick tomato pasta, my favorite. The first thing my mother ever taught me to cook. I was stirring the pasta gently through the water on the stovetop when my phone rang, its shrill ringtone causing me to jump, sending a splash of boiling hot water out of the saucepan and onto my left hand. I hissed in pain and rushed it under the cold water tap in hopes of dulling down the stinging as my phone continued to ring. It could wait. My hand could not. After I was sure it would be okay and the pain had subsided, I picked my phone up and examined the number. It was one I hadn't had saved into my phone, a number I didn't know of. My eyebrows crossed and I dialed it back as I continued to stir my pasta. It rang 2 times before a male voice picked up. "Hello," he spoke, formal yet rough. "Hello, this number just tried to call me," I informed them. "Ah, is this Haven Waters?" the voice guessed. "Yes, who's calling?" I questioned. "This is Brad from Redwood Council. I was ringing to let you know we found your wallet in Redwood Woods this afternoon." He spoke, formal and proud, as my lips parted and my eyes crossed, confused. "That's impossible. I haven't been to the woods for about 4 years," I explained, shaking my head. That is strange. A couple of hunters were out there this evening and roamed across it. They brought it in and my son recognized the picture as you inside." He continued confidently. "Let me just check," I scoffed, turning the stove off to dig through my backpack only to freeze and realize it was in fact missing. "Oh, okay, wow, yeah, it is missing. I must have dropped it and somehow it's found its way there," I snickered. "Deranged. That's fine. Well, we have it here if you want to drop by sometime tomorrow to pick it up," he happily announced. I tried to remember when I'd last had it, but there was no clear answer. The last time I'd touched my wallet was probably a week ago when I bought groceries. I hadn't even been close to Redwood Woods. Despite it being a block away, there was no chance I'd come in any contact with an adjoining street. I rubbed my head, even more puzzled, the confusion building up inside my brain enough to drop my IQ. I needed a good night's sleep after a good dinner feed, and I couldn't wait to escape into the darkness in which I hoped would be dreamless. So you have no idea how it ended up there? Kai asked me as we drove towards Redwood Woods to pick up my wandering wallet. I haven't even gone close to Redwood. I shook my head. That is so creepy, Haven. Are you sure it wasn't stolen and ransacked, then dumped? I mean, did you have any cash in it? What about your dad's credit cards? He mused as I watched the houses and trees pass outside the window at a quick speed. No, nothing. I keep all my cards in my room. I mean, I barely use them, so I never have them on me. I explained as I thought about it. A robber wouldn't know that, though. Maybe he was watching you and assumed because you live in a big house and have rich, fancy friends and go to a good school you had the money. Ha, come on now. You're saying, 1, I have a stalker. 2, I have fancy friends and go to a good school. I scoffed as I counted on my fingers. Hey, I'm just trying to make sense of it, 'cause what we got now is nothing. It makes no sense. Sometimes things don't have to make sense, I mumbled as we pulled into Redwood Council's driveway. Crunch of dirt beneath the tires as I stared out at the closeness of darkness through the woods outline. Want me to come with you? He asked as he parked the car outside the small shack. Nah, it's okay. I'll be 2 minutes, I smiled before getting out of the car. I walked up the wooden stairs as they creaked and pushed open the door as a small bell on the top of the door rang to signal my arrival. Inside, the air was cold, brisk, and everything smelt of fresh pine wood. I approached the empty desk where it sat unattended and leaned over, looking for any sign of life. Hello? I called out softly as I looked around at the framed pictures on the walls, achievements of the council and Woods Associates. Pounding footsteps on the floorboards got closer as I leaned back and waited. Then in popped a cheerful face as he wiped a serviette across his lips. I'd clearly interrupted breakfast. Sorry, he smiled as he stood behind the desk, shuffling things in an attempt to cover the mess. Sorry, I came in so early, I mumbled as the older man began opening and closing drawers looking for something. I just came to collect my wallet. Haven, I presume? He smiled as he pulled the familiar blue leather from a bottom drawer out. How'd you know? I asked suspiciously. The picture inside. He smiled, a small mustache dancing on his top lip as he spoke. Oh, I stupidly mumbled as he handed it back to me, my fingers instantly opening it to check everything was in order. Thanks. I really appreciate it. I smiled towards him as I shoved it into my backpack. No problem. It was my son that urged me to hand it back. Otherwise, most of the lost and found is simply thrown out, he explained as he quickly looked behind himself. Your son? He goes to school with me? I asked curiously. Yeah, well, he just started. Moved here from Parkway, he proudly answered. Parkway? I mumbled, my eyes widening. You heard of him, I suspect? He snickered. Yeah, I think I know the one, I scoffed back before a pair of boots sounded and an unwanted face rounded the corner into view. He froze slightly as he saw me, looking in between me and what I now put together as his father. Hey, I broke my trance as fast as I could with a fake small smile. Hey, he grumbled as he picked a backpack up from the floor, getting ready to leave for school. Well, I better get going. I stumbled before smiling towards Brad and leaving post-haste. What took you so long? Kai asked. He took in my estranged expression. The guy liked to talk, I scoffed as he pulled out from the lot and sped off down the street in time to not see Jake exit the cabin. So was everything in there? Kai asked as we drove towards school. Yeah, nothing was touched, I sighed. That's good. Still doesn't explain what happened, though, he smiled. Doesn't matter. As long as I don't have a stalker and nothing is missing, I smiled back. I think you may have a stalker soon enough, though. That new kid, Jake, when you left in the corridor yesterday, he was not happy. His conversation didn't seem too welcoming either. Kai suddenly spoke as we neared school. What are you talking about? I asked, now fully invested in the conversation. He asked me if we were together, and I kind of said, yes. He got angry. There was just something about the look in his eyes, he explained as my mouth hung open. Why did you say yes? Were the first words out of my mouth. He wanted a, no, I know the way a guy looks at a girl, Haven. He scoffed as we pulled into the parking lot where crowds of kids scurried into the building in fear of being late. I highly doubt it, I mumbled back before I hopped out of the car and began to walk with Kai. I don't, he replied, hearing my remark as I let it drop. There was no way. The boy had only been at school for a day and he was already all over the Barbies. He was less than interested in someone like me, and if he were, it would only be for his own amusement at my expense. I hope you remembered you're coming to my house this afternoon to get ready for Tom's party, Melissa reminded me as we sat amongst our group during lunch. Of course, I sarcastically threw, as Chicago laughed in my direction. You have always been a terrible liar, Melissa shook her head at me as I threw a twisty at her, landing it in her perfectly molded fishtail plait. But she does have the most perfect hair. Deloraine winked towards me as she twisted my curls around her fingers. Why, thank you, I smiled proudly, swimming in whatever compliments I could get. I will totally kidnap your future children if they have hair like yours, Ruby continued as she began to slide her fingers into my hair to tousle the curls at the bottom. Not if I have anything to do with it, Kai spoke, causing my heart to stop in my chest. I was only 17, still planning my career in education. I didn't want to even remotely think about having children at this point in time, especially with someone I considered a close friend. It made me awkward, and I suddenly needed to walk away before my head burst. I'm going to grab a soda. You guys want anything? I asked, placing a fake smile back on my face as Chicago broke the silence with a dibs on Pepsi, soon followed by Ruby with Coke and Melissa with, of course, flavored water. I'll be right back, I told them, walking off in the direction of the vending machine. I was deep in concentration, my head leaning against the plastic, separating me from the school's snacks inside, trapped and released only with money. I had my eyes on a packet of M&Ms, my thoughts on an unhealthy chocolate snack. You know, I didn't peg him for your type. A familiar voice spoke beside me as I stuck my $5 bill into the machine. I turned my head to see the tall, looming face of Jake beside me, his arm resting on the machine as I rolled my eyes and pressed the numbers to receive my orders. Ouch. Not even a full week, and I've got the eye roll happening. He grinned as he watched me with full pitch eyes. I avoided his gaze as I pressed another set of numbers for Ruby's order. Glad you got the disdain then, I threw. You didn't answer my question. I didn't catch a question amongst all that, I smirked back, completely intent on giving him attitude. Mordecai, what about him? Made you go for it? He adjusted his first sentence as I turned to face him with 3 drinks tucked in my left arm. Nothing. We aren't together. And to be frank, it isn't really your business, I spat with narrow eyes as his mouth twisted upwards. I tried to walk away, but he was quick to step in front of me. Then how come he said you were? He scoffed, the idea of me gaining a stalker coming to mind. To keep nosy people like you away, perhaps? I snapped again as my eyes wandered towards Kai, who was well aware of the conversation we were having, his eyes hard and sharp. His grin grew wider, and his eyes fell on mine with complete focus. I couldn't look away. My palms began to sweat, and my heart raced like a runaway train. He leaned his face towards me, his breath strong like peppermint as he stared into me. Perhaps he began with a whisper, "You're the one who's dangerous for me." He finished, hitching my breathing before he pulled away and strode off, leaving me motionless, speechless in place. I stood frozen, his words racing through my head as the invisible puzzle clicked a small piece into the correct spot. Images of him in my dreams came into view like a slow-motion slideshow. His words were repeating over and over in my head. But I'm dangerous for you. I stormed towards my lunch table, dumped the drinks, and bolted from the room altogether. I aimed to a deserted corridor where I stopped to let my out-of-control breathing out, leaning my hands against a locker to support myself. It didn't make any sense. The man I'd seen in my dreams was in fact the man that was now a student in my school. He had proven that with a simple sentence. It was far too deep to be a coincidence. I composed myself after a good 10 minutes of hyperventilating, just in time for Ruby and Melissa to round the corner and find me. Apparently, Kai had told them I was speaking to the new kid, Jake, and that he must have said something to G me up. Kai wasn't happy about it. In fact, he was fuming. I made another lie up, telling them he was making casual conversation about psych class when we wandered off topic, and he asked about my mother and father. I broke down at the mere mention of my mother, and that's why I bolted. Kai was skeptic, though. Of course, I think he was looking for an excuse to hate Jake. We can skip class if you want, Kai suggested as he walked me to psychology class once I'd cooled down. No, it's okay, I weakly smiled. If he says anything, I can have him sorted out. He can't just come into this school and start causing trouble, he continued, ranting off his steam. No, Kai, I said, it's fine. You misunderstood, I shot, not wanting to start any trouble. I wouldn't be the girl that guys started fights over. I refused to be that girl in the middle. Okay. He eased up, sensing my frustration before brushing the back of his thumb over my cheek. the last load of kids beginning to pack into the classroom, that including Jake, who was now having a death stare match with Kai. "Drop it." I shoved a hand against Kai's chest, catching his eye at the subtle contact before he smiled and walked off. I rolled my eyes and followed in tow towards the unknown. I kept my distance and hoped Jake would find somewhere else to sit from now on, but of course, that wasn't going to happen unless I paid someone to do so. I took my seat and tried to calm my breathing. All I kept thinking was, this man appeared in my dream, then my school, and he knew he had appeared in my dreams, and to my astonishment, he thought the entire thing to be worthy of a charming half-smile. I wanted to slap myself. I wanted to slap him. I wanted to run, but I wanted to be sane and pretend it never happened. What would he do then? He couldn't do anything, right? Before I could pay too much attention to him beside me, my eyebrows creased at the empty seat to my right where Whitney had sat all year for the past 2 years. She had never missed a class. Even when she was on the brink of passing out from sickness, she would sit there sniffling and drowsy, so for her to not be here today made me uneasy. Mr. Warner began the class with his usual tirade of rhetorical questions. By this stage, I'd be fully invested in what he had to say, keen to learn anything and everything new. But now, there were other things on my mind, strange things that weren't humanly possible, and it was only day 2. How on earth was I going to cope? "I didn't meant to make you upset earlier." He started within 10 minutes of the class, whispering gently towards me. "I'm trying to learn here," I sighed. How had he not intended to make me upset? Did he think I was going to be happy about the fact he was able to prove the impossible? If he did, he was more insane than I was, and that itself seemed impossible. I could see a small smile envelope his perfect lips, but dared not to turn as my heart began to beat erratically. I wanted to smack the smile right off of his face. "You aren't like the other girls here. You seem to really dislike me," he continued anyways as I rolled my eyes again. He spoke as though he was proud of the fact I did not like him. "I'm glad you know where I stand," then I shot, simply. "It's kind of insulting." He narrowed his eyes on me, his broad body leaning forward on the desk as he tried to look directly at my face. I was sure he knew that once our eyes connected, that I couldn't look away. He was playing me like a piano. I decided to play against the cards in his hands. I wanted him to know I wasn't afraid of him, that I wasn't going to cave underneath his mere presence and attitude. He may have had every other girl wrapped around his finger, but I wasn't going to be another one of them. "I don't know how you did it, or why, but it's really creepy, and it gives me all the more reason to stay away from you. After all, you're dangerous, remember?" I smartly whispered as I kept my eyes forward. "Did what?" he tried, attempting to get me to admit the absolutely unthinkable reality. "You know exactly what," I angrily spat, turning my face towards him. The worst thing possible to do. He was grinning like a child, his teeth white and perfect as he looked at my lips, to my eyes before roaming my face with pride. "I wasn't lying, though. I am dangerous for you," he whispered, barely audible as everything around me seemed to freeze and lay silent. "You know nothing about me, and if you did, I'd consider it an offense," I whispered back, finding a part of me that wasn't afraid to bite back. Only every time I gnawed on him, the more he would smile, which infuriated me further. "You're making this hard for me, aren't you?" He almost growled under his breath as his eyes searched my face for something I was unaware of. But the move made me shift, and for the first time ever, I felt uncomfortable around a guy that was making my heart beat so loud I could hear it inside my ears. I turned my face around back to the front of the class and tried to concentrate as hard as I could, but it was near impossible with Jake beside me, his arm draping over the back of my chair for a good half an hour. I was scared to move in fear my heart would betray me and splatter out my nose. When the bell rang to end class, I ran just as fast as I had yesterday to avoid unwanted conversation. Thankfully, there were enough prowling girls around to slow him down, and this time he seemed to rather enjoy it. "What about this one?" Melissa asked as she held a fancy dress up, the fabric skin hugging and short at the leg, the color fire red. "Not my color," I shrugged as she slumped the dress down with her arms, her eyebrows creased at me with frustration. "You can't wear virgin white every single time you go out, you realize. It's about time you get some attention. About time you get some notice from boys beside from Kai," she spoke, staring at me with wide almond eyes. "I don't like attention," I shrugged again. "Well, that's too bad. People love you, and you don't even have to do anything. You're lucky. People like me actually have to try." She smiled, throwing the dress at me as I swatted it away. "You are beyond trying, and you know that deep down I complimented, and it was true." Girls like her were automatically loved. She was beautiful, and she had the most bubbly personality I'd ever come across. She also had a wild streak. Something boys craved. How about I make you a deal? She started, shuffling around in her extra-large walk-in closet again, the size fit for a queen or princess. Her parents were lawyers, very good lawyers. They once helped my cousin get out of a breaking and entering charge, something I wasn't proud of knowing when I was a fragile 6-year-old. You let me choose the perfect sexy dress for you tonight, and you don't have to come out with me this weekend. How about that? She tried to bargain with me. I sighed and thought about it. Something inside me wanted to just give in. Why was it that Melissa had to beg me, a 17-year-old, to go out to a local party and have fun? Why did that kind of thing not appeal to me naturally? I wasn't sure of the reasons. Perhaps it were because of my upbringing, or because that I was forced into growing up after my past persuaded me to. It could never be known, yet here I was, moping about. I bit my bottom lip and swayed on my feet. It was about time I let loose once in a while. I deserved to have a good night out. I deserved attention, didn't I? Deal, I agreed as her smile brightened, and she shuffled more vigorously through her clothes for a second before stopping dead in her tracks. What? I asked, worried. We shouldn't make you too sexy, though, she mused, more to herself as she turned around with narrow eyes. And why's that? I asked curiously. Well, you've got Kai on your hip even when you're in your casual skinny jeans and preppy shirts. But this new one, Jake. She trailed off, staring at me with a flirty smirk and raised eyebrows. What about him? I questioned, the mention of his name sending me into flutter. I see the way he looks at you. It's more intense than the way Kai looks at you. She smiled broadly as she turned back around and continued to search her closet. Why does everyone keep saying that? I threw my hands up and collapsed backwards on her queen-size bed. Why are you complaining? He's hot. And the attention must be nice. It's not. You liar. I'm not lying. There's something about him I genuinely don't like. Like the idea of you and someone actually holding hands, or touching, any human contact at all, maybe. She scoffed. Maybe, I whispered to myself, the idea of him touching me at all, sending shivers through my entire system. Uh-huh. Melissa suddenly jumped with a raised voice as I sat up on my elbows. What? I asked as I watched her reappear from the dangling dresses with a bright smile. This is the one. She beamed as she held up the black dress in front of herself proudly. You will suit it perfectly. I looked it up and down and actually didn't mind its sleek design. The darker the color, the better. It hid my curves. The better I could hide out in the dark if I wanted to get away. Okay, I smiled towards her, only widening her smile further from ear to ear. Melissa spent the next 2 hours preparing me for the party. She found matching heels for me to wear, ones that were sure to break my ankles by the end of the night. I was allowed to leave my hair out, the curls ending just below my breasts as the fabric of the plain black dress hugged me all the way around. I pulled the thin straps into perfect alignment on my shoulders and stared back at myself in the mirror as Melissa came up behind me like a proud mother as she watched her daughter readying for prom. She was more stunning than I looked. She wore the fire-red dress she'd thrown at me earlier. Her hair had been curled like mine naturally was, and the eyeliner brought out the honey color from her face with more glow. You ready? She asked me as she teased her hair with her hands. I guess so, I sighed before she pulled me along with a cold, manicured hand. Melissa's mum volunteered to drive us to Tom's, which was 3 blocks from her home. It didn't take long, and the closer we got, the more I started to get nervous. I hadn't worn anything like this since my sister was around to go partying with. Ever since she left, I had given up on that life, but I had made the decision to go out tonight. So I would make the most of it. I was wasting my teenage life away with worry and work, and it was about time I let go for a little bit despite Dad's heaviest past arguments. I needed to get it out of my system. Once we arrived and Melissa's mother harassed her on her behavior, we were set out the front of Tom's already rocking house. Lights were beaming from the large 2-story home, along with music that bounced through the concrete and superficial grass outside. Let's do this, Melissa excitedly smiled as she grabbed my arm and dragged me forward. I allowed her drag me along as a few more arriving eyes wandered towards us, towards me. As we gained distance, the music grew louder and the bouncing off the walls and floors grew into a house-sized boombox. People I recognized from school were everywhere, along with a few faces I didn't know of. Melissa greeted someone at least every minute, and before we knew it, we were both holding bottles of vodka. There was no point in talking over the music, which was near impossible. Teenagers were already drunk, swaying awkwardly in the crowd as other people shouted and cheered. Some even sang along with the popular pop music. I wondered how long they'd been drinking for. Hours probably, and it was only an hour until 11 o'clock. I followed Melissa as best I could, trying not to lose her in the crowd in fear of being squished. I was aware a lot of the boys were staring towards us as we stood on the sideline against the kitchen granite bench, Melissa swaying to the music with her hips as she swigged down her drink. I tried to ignore it. Eye contact only gave them the courage to approach and flirt, something I wanted to avoid the most. "Look," Melissa screamed over the music with a pointing hand as she leaned her head against mine. I peered into the crowd as I followed her finger when my eyes roamed across Ruby, Chicago, and Kai, who had just arrived. Ruby was already tipsy, a bottle of whiskey in her hands as she rocked to the music. Chicago was looking around into the crowd, prowling for a girl he'd swoop in and grab like always. The boy had the best style I'd ever seen, and he was undeniably attractive with blonde, short hair and big blue eyes. He was tall and rugged, always a gentleman. Kai's gaze instantly found us, found me, and his eyes zoomed in on me the second he had taken in what I was wearing in comparison to what I usually wore. "Wow," he mouthed as he stood in front of us, bewildered as Melissa giggled beside me, her elbow pushing into my ribs subtly. I couldn't help but smile and roll my eyes at the same time as I took another swig of my drink, the raspberry flavor drenching my throat like lolly water. I had to stop myself from drinking the entire bottle all at once in front of Kai, who would instantly tell me to slow it down. Kai's brother was an alcoholic, and I had never seen the boy touch a bottle my entire life. Before I could distract myself or lose myself outside, away from the crowds, Kai grabbed me by the arm and tore me away from the kitchen area, leaving Melissa with Ruby as they clinked glasses and downed their tequila with lemon shots. I was dragged to the dance floor where Kai took both my hands and began to push and pull me to the beat of the music. I threw my head back and laughed, feeling idiotic as I attempted to force back my uncoordinated muscles. I wasn't a dancer. I couldn't dance to save my life. With the help of Kai's patience and confidence, it was within 10 minutes of fits of laughter, flirting, and stumbles that we were swaying and dancing as rapidly as all the others on the dance floor. I was having fun, and I couldn't wipe the smitten smile off my face as Kai and I got closer and closer with our movements. Our noses almost touched, our fronts brushing against each other as we danced carelessly around with the other drunken teenagers. It was the most fun I'd had in at least 3 years. After what felt like hours of dancing, I decided I needed air. I needed to breathe and catch up on reality before our dancing brought our intimacy together. That was not what I needed added on to the drama I had already mustered together. By this stage, I'd had at least 4 drinks within my short breaks, and I could already feel the effect it was having on my slim, small, lightweight body. I managed to lose Kai in the crowd as he talked to another group of his football friends. In that moment, I decided to sneak out the front, which was now deserted, dark and almost post-apocalyptic. I soaked in the fresh air and relished in the cold breeze. I inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly as the alcohol of what I had quickly absorbed soaked into my bloodstream. My head and brain were dizzy. My eyes were aware, yet I felt as though I was looking through a colorful kaleidoscope meant to amuse young children. I knew I couldn't drink anymore. I knew that if I did, things would not end well. I leaned my back against the short stone fence at the front of the home, my eyes closed as I tilted my head back to prevent vomit from arising. Gradually, the air soothed my aching body and settled my agitated stomach. But it was soon to emerge again with a vengeance, when the sudden feeling of being watched overwhelmed me. My eyes darted open and I near jumped at the sight of a tall, well-dressed Jake lingering directly in front of me. Sooner or later, I was expecting him to show up. But now that I was far from sober, I was worried what I would do or let slip from my big drunken mouth. Instantly, his eyes wandered from my face to my dress, to my legs, then all the way back up again. His face was straight and composed as he pushed his hands into his jeans pockets. "What do you want?" I slurred as I pushed myself off the wall, stumbling on my heels as Jake quickly stepped forward in case I fell face first. "What have you done to yourself, Haven?" He sighed as he slowly watched me with caution. "I'm having fun. Isn't that the purpose of these thingies?" I laughed, hating every word as it came out of my tingling lips. "By drinking enough to make you do something stupid later on in the night?" he asked rhetorically as I fell back against the expensive fence. I giggled as I stared up at the dark clear sky. "I'm Haven Waters. When do I ever do something stupid or reckless?" "Never too late to start, is it?" he continued, the sweet smell of pine trees and peppermint overpowering me. "What's the worst that could happen?" I shrugged, avoiding his face. "Okay, where do you want me to start?" he snapped as he watched me carefully. "Maybe with the 4 dozen boys that will no doubtedly attempt to take advantage of your misinterpreted go-lucky attitude." "Why do you care?" I scoffed, pushing myself off the wall again to storm off. But this time I wasn't so lucky with getting away as dramatically as I had hoped. My heel caught on a strong, thick piece of grass and I felt myself stagger forward unbalanced. Before I could even tip forward towards the ground with my face, Jake had closed the space between us and caught me, just as stereotypical as it could possibly get. His arms were extremely warm through his neat blue dress shirt, and the closeness made my heart stop completely in my tight chest. My ears, my nose, my brain, it all fell silent as he lifted me up enough for me to regain my lost balance. I clutched on as hard as I could and tried to steady myself enough to push away when the mere though of separating from his warm touch stopped me. "Haven!" Kai's all-too-familiar voice suddenly rang out as my eyes darted towards the front of the house where he stood, almost enraged at the position between Jake and I. "Kai," I smiled, brushing myself off as Jake slowly let go, his posture changing completely as Kai walked towards us. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Kai spoke sternly, his eyes flicking in between us like we were up to no good kids on our first date. I could smell the tension. The testosterone were swimming around me and it made me nauseous. "She isn't alone, clearly," Jake snapped back. "I'm just going to be honest here and say I don't trust you the least bit. Especially around Haven," Kai bravely spoke towards the man twice his muscle. "You aren't her father, nor her boyfriend, so I'm pretty sure that leaves the trust up to Haven herself." Jake shot back as I stood dizzy, nauseous, and lightheaded. "She isn't well enough to even perceive trust at the moment, but I assume you've already noticed that." "What is that supposed to mean?" Jake demanded, the anger radiating heat as he edged towards Kai. "Stop!" I screamed towards them as I stepped in front of Jake to prevent any punches being thrown. "Neither of you own me, neither of you have the right to be acting like my father or bodyguard. So both of you, let it go," I demanded, slurred. "I'm just looking out for your best interests, Haven." "You know," that Kai continued, still staring at Jake without a single blink. "You know what? You aren't my boyfriend, Kai, so I think you should give me some space. I appreciate everything. I really do. But it's getting suffocating," I snapped, staring at him as I stood in front of him, Jake behind me. "You're drunk. You don't know what you're saying. Let me take you home." Kai shook his head as he grabbed my upper arm in an attempt to drag me. "No!" I shouted, pulling back to release his grip as Jake stepped forward again. "I think you need to leave. Let me be. I need to breathe. Without you here to control how I breathe and where I breathe." I spat as I stared him down. "At least go back inside and find Melissa," he tried as I glared at him. "Kai, I can take care of myself. Leave." I pushed eagerly again. He chewed on his bottom lip for a moment before turning and storming off. I knew it was rough, and I knew he was looking out for me. But the more I let him take control of my life, sober or drunk, the more power he would assume he had over me, the more decisions he thought he could make for me, and I wasn't going to become the girl he felt he had power to manipulate. "Would it be out of line to ask if I could take you home?" Jake's quiet voice came from behind me as I stood watching where Kai's beeline disappeared. I snapped from my trance and looked down at the ground, the colors and distance making my head spin. "You want me to trust someone who claims they are dangerous to be around?" I scoffed as I shook my head before beginning to walk away down the street. I could hear his footsteps following me, but ignored them as I unsteadily wandered down the dimly lit sidewalk. "I wouldn't hurt you, Haven," he tried as he followed me. "Oh, sure, because being dangerous isn't always a bad thing," I snickered again. "It's hard to explain, especially when you're in this kind of a condition. I may be drunk, but I'm not stupid. You are if you keep walking in the middle of the night alone dressed like that." His words made me slam on my brakes. I stopped mid-stride and crossed my eyebrows. "Dress like what?" I demanded angrily as I spun around towards him. "Ask your mate, Kai," he scoffed sarcastically. "No, I'm asking you," I spat, my hands on my hips. He rolled his eyes as dark as the night sky before landing on my face. "Let me take you home, Haven," he sighed, the sound of him speaking my name shivering through my skin. "No, I want to know what I'm dressed like. People take advantage of people like you, especially when all of your common sense has gone down with the alcohol. People like me? You're just digging a deeper grave, aren't you?" I growled, turning to walk off again. "I'm not going to leave you alone until I know you're home safe," he sighed, following me once again. "How about this? You tell me what I'm dressed like, and what kind of people I am, then you can take me home." I bargained as I continued walking unsteady. "Fine," he quickly agreed, faster than what I was expecting. I stopped walking and turned around, waiting to hear what he had to say. "People like you are, kind and caring. Most of the time you see only the good in people, and that is how other people take advantage of you without you even realizing it. Besides, you and I both know how you're dressed. The same opinion you thought when you looked at yourself in the mirror before you left tonight. How do you know what I thought? I spat. You're modest enough to not strut around with your head in the clouds, but I know that when you saw yourself like this, you knew how beautiful you were, he admitted, the words coming out like something I was dreaming amongst the pine forest again. Beautiful? I repeated, doubtfully. His eyes bore into mine with a stern expression before averting his face anywhere but my direction. Let's go, he spoke, expressionless as he turned and began to walk across the street to where I recognized his Aston Martin sitting. I didn't say anything else. I didn't want to. I couldn't. I barely knew this man, and here he was giving me a lift home after calling me beautiful, kind, and caring. I'd never been called that by anyone except for my mother and father. My stomach hurled on itself as I crossed the street behind him and pulled the passenger door open, where I was enveloped with a rush of pine scent and leather mix. I was careful as I got in not to scratch any of the perfect black leather. If I wasn't as nauseous as I was and exhausted, I would have hyperventilated being in Jake's car, being as close to him as I was, but I couldn't concentrate on anything, and I was going to pay for it even more tomorrow at school. The drive home was simple, quiet. I tried to keep my eyes closed along the smooth ride, the light from outside hurting my head. I texted Melissa that I had gotten a ride home and I was safe. She replied with an incoherent response varying from letters to numbers. I thanked Jake with a mumbled response as he continuously asked me if I was okay and if I would be all right. He asked if my parents would be home to rouse on me, but I let it slip. I would be alone for the entire week. That was all I managed out before I felt my stomach rise along with its contents. As quickly as I could, I thanked him and raced inside in time to throw up in the downstairs bathroom. I suddenly remembered why I stopped drinking. As sluggishly as I could, I took a quick hot shower, dressed in my short shorts and tank top before collapsing on the lounge with an empty, cranky stomach. I was going to pay for my actions within the next 24 hours. Just when I fell into a much-needed deep sleep, the slow, creeping sound of scratching began to enter my mind. I assumed my brain was playing tricks on me as I listened and focused, more aware, and eventually, it stopped. I closed my eyes again and drifted off when the sound came begging once again, this time more forceful. I shot my eyes open and dragged my body upwards. Go away, I groaned as I rubbed my eyes and sat up. The scratching continued towards the front of my house, and suddenly, despite my state, I knew the sound immediately, memories of the white wolf on my doorstep rushing back. It was him. I stood up and balanced myself carefully with my hands before walking slowly towards the front door where more scratching continued. I spied out a nearby window and saw that there was no rain, no thunder, nothing but clear skies. Why was this animal at my doorstep again? I peeped out the window next to the front door, and sure enough, there on my patio sat the still position of a white, large wolf. I almost smiled at the company, but quickly erased it when I realized the danger was back, the same danger I had so bravely ignored the first time. I should have left it. I should have walked away and called animal control. These things were killers, and if I was attacked, no one would hear me scream. I would die. I closed my eyes and unlatched the door. I was going to blame the alcohol I'd had on the rash decision I was now making. I pulled the door open and revealed the sitting, polite statue of the white wolf in front of my door. "Why are you here again?" I asked him as it looked up at me, the reflection of my face staring back at me through his deep, colorless eyes. I sighed and held the door open as it waited patiently for instructions. "Same rules as last week apply," I told it as I held a hand out, signaling it to come in. He stood up and walked quickly into my house, his fur dry and thick as he wandered into my living room where he last slept, then magically disappeared. "How did you get out last time, Rover?" I questioned it as I latched the door shut and followed in behind it. I found the same towel I'd used before and set it in front of the unlit fireplace. The white wolf, I'd originally named Rover, sat neatly down, crossing his large paws as he relaxed in my home's comfort. I set myself down on the lounge and my eyes began to droop, like before, only without the influence of alcohol. I was exhausted, not to mention still drunk as I watched the wolf lie quietly down. This thing wasn't going to hurt me. He was only using me for the comfort of my home. If this was the only company I could get without being tempted into having some kind of intimate relationship with, then that's what I'd take. Before I let my body take over, I took one last glance towards Rover, who now had his head up, his eyes watching me carefully as I settled into sleep, letting it overtake me willingly. Unfortunately, I didn't wake up as willingly as I fell asleep. My empty stomach and my hangover decided it would double over on itself and attempt to throw up whatever was left inside of me. To no avail. I was dry reaching, and when I was done, and stood, My head began to pound. My lack of partying had in fact given me a disadvantage. I was sure despite Melissa's and Ruby's drinking, they'd be fine. They'd be heading to school right now as I dragged my feet back to the lounge where I collapsed and felt my eyes bulge from my skull. My limbs hung from the lounge as the empty towel in front of my fireplace caught my eye. I sat up on my elbows and cringed at the pain shooting through my head as I realized, like expected, Rover, my white wolf friend, was gone. I sighed, almost disappointed before collecting my cell phone and dialing Kai's number. I barely remembered what had happened last night, but I had small visions of what had happened between me and him, also what had happened between Jake and I. "Morning," he answered after the first ring. "Morning," I groaned. I could hear him stifling a laugh just at the mere sound of my state. "Are you laughing at me?" I asked, holding back a smile. "You aren't coming to school today, are you?" he assumed. "Why is that funny? I knew it was going to happen, that's all." "I bet you tried to tell me numerous times last night," I scoffed as I rubbed my temples. "Yeah, I tried, but you were a nasty piece of work." I picture him scrunching his nose up, shuddering. "I'm sorry," I groaned. "I believe you. I'm just glad you got home okay. I mean, you did get home safe, didn't you?" Obviously, I rolled my eyes. "You went straight to sleep?" "What else?" I questioned. "Just making sure you didn't do anything stupid," he sighed. "As in what, Kai?" I urged, knowing well what he was insinuating. "You did go home pretty wasted with Jake. The one guy at school girls can't seem to keep away from Haven," he explained casually. "Don't even go there, Kai. You know I wouldn't have done anything like that. Just looking out for you, you know that." "I know. Well, I'm heading off now. You get some rest, have a big breakfast, and I'll message you on break." "Okay, I will," I promised before he hung up and I collapsed back down onto the couch. It was about 7 in the morning, and despite my uninterrupted sleep, I felt I needed more. Way more. I once again ignored the growling inside my empty stomach and closed my eyes. It wasn't long until I dozed off in the wonderful silence and coolness of the living room. Shortly after I fell asleep, I was brought into another unwilling dream. I knew it was a dream as soon as I stepped foot into the familiar woods of what I now presumed was redwood. The air around me was cool, fresh, and the silence impenetrable as I stepped forward with a crunch of leaves beneath my boots. I looked around and noticed the damaged bridge I'd seen upon first meeting Jake in the middle of a group of pine trees. Beneath it was the same shallow water where frogs, fish, and tadpoles swam urgently around, creating patterns on the water's dirty surface. I approached it slowly and kept my eyes vigilant as I placed a cautious foot on its path. The wood creaked beneath it, but I felt it could hold my small weight with ease as I continued forward. The wood squeaked and the water splashed beneath me, but I urged forward and tilted my head over the broken edge to peer down at the water as it glistened in the little light allowed in from the wood's roof of trees. "Are you okay, miss?" A strange voice suddenly spoke, startling me to the point of nearly falling into the water. I spun around in time to see an unknown man striding carefully towards me. "I'm fine," I spoke as he approached, his hair dark brown and long, tied into a short ponytail at the back of his head as he looked at me with piercing green eyes.